At the time of filming, we're just over a week away from the release of Amazon's Rings of Power Season 2. So, how are we feeling about it? Season 1 had a mixed reaction. The statistic often quoted is that less than half the viewers who started watching the show actually finished watching the show, which is a pretty damning statistic for such a beloved IP. We've gotten a couple trailers for the next season, which look somewhat promising. Heck, Tom Baum's even going to be in it, which is kind of interesting. We're going to see the Barrow Wights. We're going to see some new territories in Middle-earth that hitherto were just space fillers on Tolkien's map. And we might find out if this guy is Gandalf or Saruman. But I just can't seem to shake that familiar old suspicion that maybe Amazon, with all of its hundreds of millions of dollars spent on the show, still might not fully appreciate the real challenge of telling stories about Tolkien's Middle-earth that make people actually care. So for your consideration, here's a quick storytelling-focused review of what we want to see improved in Rings of Power Season 2. Let's get into it on the art of storytelling. So first, let's acknowledge what they got right in Season 1. It was visually incredible. It had a nice glossy finish on it, and you can tell that a lot of money was spent on the VFX. Do they have the same level of imagination and artistry and love put into them as the films? I don't think so. But the show looks good, especially for a TV show. Second, some of its characters are genuinely likable. Prince Durin and King Durin stand out as probably the most interesting characters and probably the most faithful depictions of Tolkien-esque characters in the series. I think Elrond's relationship with Prince Durin was kind of charming and showed great potential for development and complication. And Adar was intriguing and showed some promise as a sympathetic villain. And I'll say that overall, the concept for the show is also interesting. It's been called a Sauron origin story, and it might be kind of fun to see how this Kirkland brand Aragorn becomes the mace-wielding Lord of Darkness that we all know and love. And third, it's just genuinely exciting to go back to Middle-earth. I'm personally really interested in seeing how a new generation of artists is going to interpret Tolkien's world, in which there's great potential for compelling new stories. Now, let's also acknowledge what Season 1 got wrong. The show's protagonist, a young Galadriel, was not especially relatable. Her motivations were unclear, and she was a bit of a Mary Sue, being essentially flawless so that she had little room for character development. There were perhaps too many characters, making it difficult to weave a meaningful and coherent narrative thread among its many disconnected plot lines. The Harfoot plotline stood out as especially meandering and pointless. And the show's finale was kind of weird. Halbrand is revealed to be Sauron, leaving little mystery or tension left to work with. And the Southlands are revealed to be Mordor. And in case you weren't sure, this was spelled out for you using spooky typography. Now, I could go on, but I'm sure you're familiar with these criticisms, and there seems to have been a lot of consensus about these problems. Like, they're not just nitpicks, these were obvious problems with the series. Some Tolkien fans took issues with how the lore was handled. The timeline of the Second Age seems to have been hugely compressed, so the forging of the rings, the downfall of Numenor are supposed to be spread out across thousands of years. And there were other creative liberties taken in Sauron's origin and the origin of Mithril. But let's be generous and acknowledge that adapting Tolkien's Second Age into a TV series is no easy feat. And despite the show's flaws, we should acknowledge that there are probably a lot of hardworking people on this show. So as we all wait with bated breath to see if Season 2 can redeem the series, let's reflect on what we love about Tolkien's writing and about Jackson's films, and offer up some ideas about how to fix this ailing story before it's too late. First, if Galadriel is going to be our protagonist, we need to empathize with her. We need to see some part of ourselves in her. And because we are flawed human beings, we need a flawed character whose emotional journey we can identify with. This goes way back to Aristotle's Poetics and the concept of catharsis. It's the idea that stories are a way for us to process our own feelings by living vicariously through the emotional journey of others. This is the absolute core of any story. If Galadriel can slay an ice troll without breaking a sweat, then she probably already finished her hero's journey a couple centuries ago, and maybe that would have been a good TV show. But it's not just her powers, it's the fact that she's already brave, she's already resolute, she's already determined, whereas Sam Gamgee was, a lowly gardener. So in Season 2, we need to see Galadriel struggle a little bit. She needs to have some kind of internal conflict that poses a moral question about the nature of her character. More on that in a minute. Second, gotta cool your jets with the gratuitous ultra-violence. And I know it has its place, but the reason for showing bad guys doing bad things is that so you know what your hero is fighting against and fighting for. Let's remember that at the end of the day, these shows are based on the works of Tolkien, a decidedly chill person. Depictions of evil are effective not only because they're scary looking, but also because they're juxtaposed against depictions of what is good. And Tolkien is really clear about what he thinks is good. It's not a coincidence that Frodo, Sam, and Bilbo come from a country whose people care about the earth, have strong bonds of family and community, have respect for tradition and heritage, take joy in simple pleasures, and who, despite their simple ways, surprise you with their bravery, their decency, and their integrity. That means when shadowy forces beyond their borders threaten their way of life by ripping down all the trees to build industrial machines to wage a total war of domination, you care about that. It's this moral context that makes the bad guys in The Lord of the Rings so menacing. We're witnessing a war of values, beliefs, and ideas, and that means it matters to us. So like when the Ents march on Isengard, it has a clear moral and symbolic meaning. Also, I like the part where that one Ent has his hair on fire and he dips his head in the water. Anyway, the point is that we need some moral logic, something to care about and believe in instead of just telling us that orcs are bad by showing them disemboweling people. Again, violence isn't bad per se, but it should be used sparingly and not merely as a frivolous action set piece, and especially not in Tolkien's Middle-earth. And third, the show needs a goal. If there's no perilous quest to destroy a ring or something, then what is driving the action in the plot? What is the motivation of its protagonist? And no, it can't just be find and destroy Sauron. Now, to be fair, in the first season, Galadriel is motivated by her desire to avenge her brother, Finrod, who appears to have been killed by Sauron. It's a bit thin, but it's something. Now, personally, I think that if this is a story about revenge, then it would be wise to commit to that literary form. And as we know, stories about revenge generally resolve in tragedy. Think about Hamlet, Crime and Punishment, Moby Dick. All of them are warnings about the corrupting effects of vengeance, and they generally resolve in tragedy. Now, given that The Rings of Power is a story about Middle-earth's decline into darkness, it might actually make sense for Galadriel's story to be a tragedy. But if that is the case, Season 2 needs to develop Galadriel's character in that direction. We need to see her morally conflicted, and she herself needs to grapple with the will of evil in a meaningful way. And with the 3 rings now forged, that narrative possibility is certainly there. So if I have one big hope for Season 2, it's that we get some more character depth for Galadriel and some development in her transformation from the brash, impetuous Galadriel of Season 1 into the wise and solemn Galadriel we see much later in the Third Age. I hope that's not too much to hope for. So in the end, it's not complicated. This show needs more heart, it needs more humanity, and less meaningless spectacle. It needs more Tolkien, less Michael Bay. But hey, that's just me. I'm curious what you'd like to see from Season 2. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe for more videos about storytelling.